You have, on average, 4,000 weeks to live. That's it, not a poetic estimate, not a metaphor, just math. 4,000 weeks is what you get if you live to 80. And yet we race through our days as if infinity were owed to us, as if every to-do list we complete buys us a bit more time. But it doesn't. What 4,000 weeks does, quietly, devastatingly, is remind you that time is not something you have. It's something you are, and you don't get more of it by optimizing. It slips through your fingers just the same. Burkeman doesn't begin by asking how you can do more. He begins by asking what it costs to live like you must do everything. He starts by stripping the lie we've been fed since we first picked up a planner that if we just try hard enough, focus long enough, hustle efficiently enough, we can somehow master time. He shows us how that belief is killing us. Not all at once, but slowly, in the background hum of anxiety, in the feeling that we're never quite caught up, in the unspoken guilt that no matter what we achieve, we should be doing more. There's a deep grief in that realization, a mourning really, not just for the weeks we've already lost to productivity panic, but for the idea that control was ever real. You can feel it the moment it lands, that you will never read all the books, never answer all the emails, never meet every expectation, not even your own. At first, this feels unbearable. But the deeper you sit with it, the more honest it becomes. And maybe honesty is the first step toward peace. Burkeman doesn't give you a new system. He gives you perspective, a clearing in the chaos. He says, this is it. This is your life. It's limited. It's flawed. It's yours. And once you stop trying to stretch it out like elastic, you can finally see what fits inside it. One of the most sobering things the book does is ask you to stop bargaining with time. Stop pretending that your real life begins after you've gotten everything under control. That version of the future doesn't exist. The inbox will never be empty. The house will never be perfect. The kids will never stop needing you. The anxiety will never fully pack up and leave. But something sacred happens when you stop waiting for it to. Your life stops being a rehearsal and starts being yours. Burkeman doesn't suggest we give up entirely on plans or goals, but he challenges the motive behind them. So often, we schedule and organize not to live more fully, but to escape the discomfort of finitude. We don't make a list to feel satisfied. We make them to feel in control, but control is the most exhausting illusion. And in chasing it, we often miss the one moment we actually had now. The book tells the truth most life optimization content hides, that if you try to cram more in, your life doesn't expand, it shrinks. You get busier, but not deeper. You get more done, but not more lived. In trying to do everything, you can't fully do anything. He describes it as the efficiency trap. The faster you get through your tasks, the more you attract. There is no finish line, only burnout dressed up as productivity. Burkeman's voice is never cruel, but it is clear. And that clarity hurts in the best way. It reminds you that your time is not a commodity. You cannot budget it into perfection. The real scarcity isn't hours, it's meaning. And meaning takes slowness. It takes presence. It takes the courage to choose what matters most and let the rest fall away, even if the rest is shouting your name. There's something strangely spiritual about this, not in any religious sense, but in the way it empties you, the way it forces you to confront your limitations, and instead of fixing them, embrace them. Burkeman makes you look time in the face, not as an enemy to defeat, but as a boundary that gives shape to love, purpose, and attention. What you can't do defines what you can. We are raised to believe that a good life is one where nothing is wasted. Not time, not talent, not potential. We are taught to feel shame for a slow afternoon, guilt for a half-finished project, embarrassment for rest. Somewhere along the way, productivity became morality, and the word useful became sacred. But Burkeman presses against this, gently, relentlessly. He asks, useful to whom? Useful for what? and more importantly, at what cost. The trap, he says, is that we think of time as a resource, as something separate from us, something to allocate, organize, control. But time is not a shelf you stack your life on. Time is your life. And once you see that, something breaks open. You start to question all the things you told yourself you had to do because there's no time not to. You begin to wonder whether the urgency was ever real, and you realize how much of your life has been lived on fast forward, trying to arrive at a place that never exists. Burkeman introduces the idea that we live much of our lives in the future perfect, that mythical point where all your tasks are completed, your schedule is cleared, and life can finally begin. But that day never comes. The inbox refills, the mess returns, the fatigue lingers, and we keep deferring our joy, our rest, our attention, waiting to deserve it. He calls this out with painful precision. Our obsession with getting on top of everything is a fantasy, and chasing that fantasy is often the most quietly devastating way to lose your life. We don't procrastinate because we're lazy. We procrastinate because we're afraid of choosing, afraid of commitment, afraid that if we say yes to one thing, we're closing the door on infinite others. And we are. But Burkeman insists that this is not a tragedy, it's freedom. Real freedom isn't having endless choices. Real freedom is having fewer and living them fully. There's a raw honesty in that idea. Most of us are not suffering from a lack of time. We are suffering from a lack of permission to say no, to rest, to do one thing at a time and let it be enough. We want to make all the right choices before we begin, but there's no such guarantee. There's only the messy, beautiful truth of finitude. You will have to miss out. You will have to disappoint someone. You will have to stop chasing someday. The myth of doing it all is particularly cruel because it turns every act of presence into a loss. Playing with your child means not replying to work emails. Reading a book means not cleaning the kitchen. Saying yes to your art means saying no to someone else's expectations. But what Burkeman dares to suggest is this. That's the point. Every act of presence is an act of love, not a failure to multitask. Burkeman reframes this idea of missing out, not as a glitch in the system, but as the system itself. You will miss out. You must. The only question is whether you'll miss out on the things that matter or the things that don't. And the only way to know the difference is to stop, look around, and ask, not what the world expects from you, but what your soul is quietly asking for while you're too busy chasing efficiency to hear it. One of the most heartbreaking and liberating insights from the book is that there is no perfect decision. You will never know what would have happened if you chose differently. You will never escape the anxiety of not doing enough. But once you surrender to that uncertainty, a strange kind of peace unfolds, not because everything is fixed, but because you stop trying to fix what was never broken. There's a moment in 4,000 Weeks when Burkeman talks about the temptation to build a perfect life project, to turn life into something that can be managed like a startup, a series of systems, a calendar, a workflow, but life isn't a project, it's a landscape. And you don't conquer a landscape. You walk through it, you get rained on, you get lost, and sometimes you find something that makes you forget you ever needed a destination. We are finite, he says, and this is not a flaw. It is what makes everything beautiful. It is what gives love its urgency. What makes time sacred, what turns ordinary moments into everything. We live in an age that treats distraction as default and presence as a luxury. Notifications, deadlines, dopamine loops, all of them conspire to keep us split. And we follow not because we want to, but because the noise is familiar, because silence makes us nervous, because to truly be present is to risk being with ourselves. And that's often more terrifying than any inbox. Burkeman doesn't shout about this. He just sits beside you and says, notice it. Notice how you check your phone in the middle of joy. Notice how you start planning tomorrow during a conversation. Notice how even rest becomes performative, scheduled, optimized, monetized. We've been taught that time is always slipping away, and so we grab at it with every app and alert and hack. But the grasping is the problem. The grasping is what keeps us from ever feeling like we've arrived. He doesn't blame technology. Not entirely. He sees that distraction is older than smartphones. We've always wanted to escape the hard parts of being human, but now we can. And we do. We open tabs instead of feelings. We scroll instead of speak. We stay busy instead of be. Burkeman invites us to see this not as a shameful failure, but as a survival instinct gone haywire. He doesn't offer guilt. He offers gentleness. And that gentleness is more confronting than judgment ever was. He writes about how we fill our lives with urgency so we can avoid importance, how we say yes to the minor because the major feels unbearable, and how we end up living lives full of motion but devoid of meaning. It's not that we, don't care. It's that we care too much, and the pressure of doing the right thing with our short time becomes so immense that we hide from it under mountains of busyness. We mistake frenetic movement for purpose, but they are not the same. Burkeman says patience is a rebellion, real patience, not passive endurance, but the willingness to be with the slowness of things. So to let life happen in its own time, to wait, to fail, to be mediocre at something you love, to plant without proof of harvest. In a world that worships urgency, patience is resistance, not laziness. Courage, the courage to believe that what matters can't be rushed. He writes about the difference between attention and time. You can spend hours with someone and never really be with them. You can cross off every task and never feel present in your own skin. Attention is what makes time real. And most of us are starved for it. We hunger to be seen, not in selfies or statuses, but in the quiet moments where someone looks at us without agenda. He challenges us to give that attention, not just to others, but to ourselves, not in narcissism, but in tenderness. He speaks of boredom, how we've pathologized it, how we flee from it with desperation. But boredom is where the mind breathes. It's where creativity stirs, where emotions rise up like sediment in still water. It's where truth sneaks in when we're too tired to defend against it. What if we didn't kill boredom with clicks? What if we listened to it? What if it's not emptiness, but a doorway? Burkeman talks too about surrender, not as giving up, but as getting in. Inhabit your life. Even when it's disappointing, especially when it's disappointing. Stop waiting for the perfect conditions. There is no future version of you who will finally have time for what matters. There is only now. There is only your flawed, flickering, miraculous now. This is where the book becomes more than philosophy. It becomes personal because you begin to realize this isn't about managing time. It's about choosing what you will be faithful to. Faithful not in ideology, but in attention. Faithful not in perfection, but in presence. Porting, you cannot be faithful to everything. Your life is too short. So what will you be faithful to? Your children, your craft, your breath, your aliveness. You don't get to avoid missing out, but you do get to choose what you miss out on. And maybe that's enough. There's a certain ache that settles in when you realize you will never outrun the clock. Not because you're lazy, not because you didn't try hard enough, but because time isn't a race. It never was, and that realization doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like failure because for years, maybe decades, you believed that if you just worked harder, just managed better, just kept pushing, the payoff would arrive. That someday would come, that life would begin, and then Burkeman hands you a mirror, and you see that it already did. It was beginning all along. While you were organizing your apps, fine-tuning your schedule, trying to get on top of things, life was happening in the middle of the mess and the pauses you skipped. In the small moments you rushed through, you realize you've been bargaining with time like it owed you something. But time doesn't owe. It offers and it passes. I didn't expect this book to hurt, but it did, not in a brutal way, in the way that truth always does when you're tired of pretending. It made me think of all the times I postponed joy, all the years I thought rest was something I had to earn, all the mornings I opened my eyes and felt behind before I even got out of bed. It made me grieve the version of myself who believed she had to make every second count or else the whole life was wasted. She didn't know that moments don't need to be optimized. They need to be inhabited. It made me remember the days I spent doing everything right, checking boxes, replying on time, cleaning the house, performing presents, and yet still feeling hollow by nightfall because I wasn't in my life. I was managing it like a job, trying to win time's approval, trying to deserve existing. Burkeman doesn't give you a guide. He gives you a reckoning. And in doing so, he reminds you that it is okay to do less. Not because you're giving up, but because you're choosing. And choice, real choice, always costs something. You will miss out. People will be disappointed. Some dreams will die. But if you're lucky, what remains will be yours. This book taught me to make peace with incompletion, to leave messages unread, to let the dishes sit, to let go of being impressive, because some days the most radical thing I can do is sit with my child and watch the light shift across the floor and know without apology that this is enough. I'm learning to say no to more things, not because I'm overwhelmed, but because I'm finally clear on what deserves my yes. I'm learning to stop writing lists for the person I think I should be and start living for the person I actually am. She's quieter, softer, less productive, but she laughs more. And when she rests, she rests. This book gave me permission to be finite, to stop performing like I'm limitless, to stop carrying time like a burden and start holding it like a flame, fragile, flickering, beautiful, because it ends. And so now I try not to ask, am I using my time well enough? I ask instead, am I here? Because if I am fully, presently, imperfectly here, then maybe I'm not wasting anything at all. Maybe I'm finally living.